You guys still hear? Yeah? Too loud? If I start to get too loud, let me know and I'm going to turn it down. Okay. Just stay close by in case something goes wrong. Okay, I'm going to try really hard not to try to pick the piece of pork but I can't help it now. So, is that and the job that I'm doing by delivering this material is not like setting that in stone, but it's starting the conversation, and so that I could, that's, but it and what it really means. I went on a little journey, read some books and stuff, and learned, and so I thought I would share that and maybe increase our knowledge on the subject. The term at the Velocity Conference by John Allspaw, which I think he became still be the CTO to. Oh, Flickr. I'll term right. DevOps. It's a that typically is the group and make sure that it use, and if the guy, I can't remember his name, if he doesn't turn it around, the company is toast, right? And so he also has a mentor, can't remember his name either, might be Jonah as well. Anyways, same kind of story, but it's the transformation happening in the IT world. And then, so what they did is the same authors basically went through and created this DevOps handbook that is supposed to be kind of a guide on how you make this happen within your organization. And they get into some technical stuff now by Jez Humble, and that really talks a lot about a lot more like practical and technical things that you can do to sort of speed up how you deliver. I think I've only read the introduction to that but you do things like product development, and just again, we'll address your problems later. To a finished 5,000, which is like highly creative and it's pretty chaotic sometimes. That's where sort of like that lean product development stuff comes in. Deployment lead time is the other big chunk of that. When you hear these companies talk about, well, we can do 10 deploys per day and that sort of thing. Well, a lot of times what they're focusing on is the time when a ticket is created, right? Like I've got a task to the time that work is completed or deployed into production. And it's this little graph at the bottom is just kind of highlighting like, there's space between when the ticket is created and when work is started. And there's only, a lot of times, if you look at it, there's only just a small amount of time where you're actually doing work, and there's a lot of time where you're waiting on things. Okay, so we talked about how like the manufacturing and the goal book and that sort of thing. They basically, what they've done is they have broken this down into what they call the 3 ways. Okay, and it's really around flow. Okay, is the first way, and this is like as the mentor in these books is talking these guys through the manufacturing or the IT realm. They're trying to get to them to understand these in stages as they go through. So flow is just you think of the production line, getting things to flow through smoothly and trying to understand like what the constraints are and things like that. And there was a couple eye-opening things that I'll talk about for me that that brings some perspective on where to think about this. The second way is feedback loops. Okay, and there's some valuable things that we can do so that we understand quickly when things happen and how to react to those. Management and monitoring, things like that. And then the third way is culture, continuous experimentation and learning. How we right, like common sense, everything flows. They starve for work. People that are doing a huge, you're not at the same level of momentum that. And reduce batch sizes is another one, and this was something that was really new to me. In that it's counterintuitive, right? So they have this thing called single piece flow, and so now we get to do a little exercise and see what people think about this, and then I'll show you some of the data. So there's this classic example of sending out letters, all right? So you have, let me see if I can remember this before I show it. You have envelopes, you have letters through, and you need to stuff to lick the envelope and seal it. You need to stamp the envelope, and then it can go out the door. Well, how many people would say, okay, well, I'm just going to fold all the letters, right? Because I can put them in front of me. I've got a stack. I'll fold all the letters. And then there's another alternative, right, which is to fold a letter, stuff it in the envelope, lick the envelope, stamp the envelope, right? How many people would do that? Ooh, okay. Yes. The question was, would I like all the people receiving the envelopes the same? Sure. Okay, so I'll what I would do, which was the first option, is that you don't ship anything until everything is done, right? And one of the other drawbacks is that there are cases where you could do a whole lot of work before you have visibility into what it takes to do the process from beginning to end, right? And so, so when you're delivering, the customers don't get a chance to give you feedback until you've blown it all out to them in one big step, right? And in manufacturing, the small batch size is very important to minimizing inventory on your floor and getting things out to the customer so that they can give you feedback to say, hey, this jet turbine that you just built, thank you for giving me the first one off the line, but there's like 12 things wrong with this. We got to go back to the drawing board, versus thanks for all 1,000. Guess what? So we have the ability to detect defects faster, and we focus. For example, and I really have to have these 12 features before we can do it. Well, getting feedback. I mean, it's kind of a bummer, right? You deliver 10 features after working on something for 6 months, and the users are like, "Oh, that's terrible. That doesn't work how I want it to work." Well, say in that case, the analogy kind of breaks down there a little bit, just because normally we're talking about teams, and if I'm working on a feature for a software feature, the multitasking, avoiding multitasking really is, let me focus on that one feature at a time, right? And let me get that done. And the idea of, remember, the value stream is getting the finished feature out the door to the customer, right? So, and where that where that comparison comes in is, think of it at the feature level for software of getting that out the door in the customer's hands, you know, instead of piling a bunch of features together.
So, with regards to that, and the stamper, just if they're working collaboratively
Right,
at the same time on that one envelope,
right,
that one process. So it's not like one person forwards and then he clicks and then he can. There's
right,
enough specializations, although the more you can eliminate specialization, the better off you can be.
right, right. Yeah, the comment was that the team kind of comes together. If you think of a software feature as the fully assembled and stamped envelope, right? You've got people that are working on each one of those little features, or possibly you work on, you know, you may work on one and then work on sequence, but it's the overall feature going out the door first, as opposed to having many features grouped at the same time, right?
Well, Troy, I think the analogy that Greg was coming up with is the deployment after folder is done before you do your first QA. That's where it really plays well.
Right.
You're not waiting until you can.
Yeah, you can talk about, you know, daily work type of ways that you organize that, and then you can talk about the bigger picture of features. Remember that if you lump too many things together, then you elongate your timeline and you reduce yours and being able to deliver value quickly, right? That machine try to maximize tests so that people can, you know, do. Yeah, yep.
Forcing that, making it look visible, you go back to the client and say, well, you know, we put that in 2 weeks ago, it's step 4, and then you cause this visibility of this step 4 or whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah. So Greg made a comment about technical debt and how that can, you know, build up and become a problem, which actually, I don't know if I have a slide for, but I can talk about it. Okay. In IT that we see is that, you know, development does their work, they give it to operations, and when development and operations are separate, like operations is all about, we got to keep this thing running, you know, and we got to keep it performant and all that kind of stuff. Well, what happens is if you, you know, if the operations people start to feel some pain because of some shortcuts and some hacks that maybe the development team has taken, that sort of erodes the trust relationship between the operations and the dev people, right? The dev people are often pressured by the business to deliver more value, and they continue to make shortcuts, which only reinforces, right? You put bad after bad into the environment, and that only reinforces poor trust between operations and dev. You get to the point where you've built anything, right? Okay, another piece on maximizing flow is eliminate hardships and waste. And the quote here is, anything that causes delay for the customer, such as activities that can be bypassed without affecting the result, right? So partially done work, leaving things half done, no one likes that, right? Like that's a big irritant, you know, to us. Extra processes, extra features, task switching again, motion. I will mention, because I have offshore in there, that they talk about how offshore, well, right, in team cycle, right, with all these different, rest some of those things. Non-standard work, heroics. This would be a good time to mention the bottleneck that's in the Phoenix project. The guy's name is Brett, I think, or Brent. And, you know, so it wasn't a machine that was a bottleneck. We don't have any Brents here, do we? No. Yeah, so the bottleneck in the Phoenix project was Brent. It was a person, not a machine. And for those of you that have been around for a while, there's almost always somebody within an organization that seems to have most of the knowledge, right? And we see this a lot of times with startups as well, is they'll have one technical person, you know. They've got that one person, they're trying to get going, they're trying to minimize their expense, one geek, and they'll do everything that I need. Well, what they realized is everything that had to happen around deployments and operations, fixing databases, fixing legacy systems, Brent, right? Like he became basically a 4-letter word instead of a 5-letter. In the book, like everyone hated the fact that Brent, like he was the only one that could do this stuff. And so what they did is they elevated and they scheduled that wonder about whether some of that is it's right. So there, you know, and there could be some good. Second way, we don't get feed for this project is 0.0. Is that what it was? Very positive experience with that. Toyota came up with the concept of the answer. There's to nine public stops. And
I think that's also 2 month project done every 2 hours.
yeah. So the point was there are situations that that they are trying to focus on is like production issues, where you know you might, like Amazon does this. Amazon has one of the most successful models. It's the author's opinion and a few others, right, where they have teams that do everything for a particular product, right? Like they do the support, the deployments, they do everything. And in those cases, right, like since the entire team is kind of responsible, they may subdivide and they may not swarm everybody, but because they fully own that particular technical solution, when something goes wrong, it's a benefit for the entire team to really come in and attack that as quickly as possible, learn from it, and move on, right? But yes, you have to use common sense. You can't. I think you would be degrading to say every little thing that comes up we have to get everything done, right? Yeah. And this is probably one of the biggest points of DevOps in general. The second one, which is pull quality closer to the source. That you know, software projects is, oh well, we never talked to security, you know, or we didn't really talk to infrastructure. Like there's all this like waiting and not, you know, really collaborating enough with those downstream, what are traditionally downstream things to, and then there's, you know, there's all sorts of problems that come from that. So one of the things that they're saying is when we combine all these roles on a team, we're able to do things like build in our security stuff up front, right? Like we talk about those things up front, they're not an afterthought. Quality is the same way, right? Like how do we incorporate automated testing and things like that and have the manual testing stuff, if possible, be the thing that really gets value from manual testing and ideally doesn't take a lot of time, right? So this is where a lot of the automation pieces come in, but it's just more than that. It's considering some of these things up front. You know, it's like we have capabilities that prevent cross-site request, like forgery stuff, right? And a lot of like web frameworks actually build some of that stuff in, which is a security concern, right? Like they push that stuff forward, but you know, the last thing that we want to do is work and build a solution where we get that and then we're kind of embarrassed and also creating a risk for the company where somebody's like, wait a minute, you're not doing any of this stuff? Most of us know that for secure data, right, we're going to use SSL. That's easy, but there are so many other vulnerabilities and things that are out there now that we can counteract within software. Denial of service, I mean, we could go on, right? And that's a whole nother topic in and of itself, but if we don't think about those things at the beginning, then they become real pains in the end. Mm-hmm.
How do we balance that, like as consultants, with the desire to get started on things? Because I feel like we have to ask the client so many questions up front that like it's hard enough to get like decent requirements for what they want, let alone like, oh, have you thought about security and deployment and all these other things?
Yeah. Yeah, the point was how do we really approach conversations about that, right? When we start talking about these, if they're not really all that educated when it comes to software development, they are really just thinking about, I just wanted to do this, you know. But as a business person, right, they should also be thinking about the risk that created people that are holding this building up to skimp on QA. No. So I think part of it's almost always an education process when and if we have personal data situations, you know, you name the target where this stuff has been very damaging to these organizations by getting that data out there like that. So, and there's a fine line between, you know, which we never want to do. We just want to bring reality to it and try to help educate them and understand. So it is, I'll just going to do with, or am I creating many, they think they want to keep documents, has been kept what they wanted. You make a decision. Time 12. Ooh. Now we're to the third. I do want to talk about some control of things, you know, things that we learn that I think we and things like this and opinions, right? It's most of us it's actually a problem. They're going to get blamed. Is only groups that are like have you know, like it's enough that this has become a regular practice. Something has to change because, you know, we're people, we have families, we want to be able to, you know, spend time with them and not spend all of our time at work trying to fight fires under huge amounts of pressure. Any questions, comments? Yeah?
So the CTO of Angie's List came out a couple months ago saying we really are short of DevOps folks. So can you speak to that in terms of if
Yeah.
we're going to be hearing that in terms of our recruiting and also filling positions?
Yeah, the blunt answer is there's no such thing as a DevOps person, right? So, because like what we've talked about here is it is a way of organizing teams, it's looking at flow, it's all that kind of stuff. Now, the way that I would answer that is with a question, right? Which is to say, what do you mean by that? Because here's what I understand that to mean. Now, what do you mean? Now, a lot of times what they're probably trying to convey when they say that is I'm looking for somebody who's a generalist, right? It's somebody who knows how to get in and mess with an application server configuration or Linux permissions, and also somebody who knows how to write code, knows how to maybe stand up a MySQL database, you know, knows how to configure Splunk, you know, any number of those things, and to really try to understand how they define that. But if we get an opportunity to talk about some of these other things, right, like that's also really important.
That's one of those things where you get the weird tension between general and specific.
Right.
Because you want someone who's general, but they may also be looking for someone who has, say, written some Puppet scripts, and you know, I've gone out and
Yeah.
configured Jenkins to do some of these things.
Yeah.
So it's like that's Chris exactly right. We need to have a follow-up conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Todd's comment was that's where you can get into the generalist versus specific conversation, and we all know, right? Like, I can be like I've had the good fortune of doing, you know, ops work, you know, app server configuration stuff, sysadmin. I mean, all those kinds of things. But I can't just rock up to a client and be like, okay, you're using Puppet. Just give me like a day. I'll have you set. It does not work that way, right? Like those things take time to learn, and we don't want to be the ones that are making a bunch of newbie mistakes trying to solve a problem that a client has. And so you have to get kind of real with that and try to understand and not overpromise, you know, because a lot of us are, you know, generalists, but that doesn't mean we can tackle those situations without a lot of work and some time. So, Brad?
So I had something to back on last night as you were talking. I'm not sure if I think it's leans more on the business side of things, but it seems like very experimentation, that there's like a measurement, like measuring the
Mhm.
experimenting, I guess.
Yep.
And I don't know, everyone's just more, like, does that fit into this discussion? And it's kind of like, this is more on the consulting side, I suppose, but
Yeah.
being able to look at the process as a whole.
Yep.
Help them find ways to like identify, measure certain things.
Yes. So the question was, thinking from the business perspective, how do you sort of get to the point where you help people understand, right, where some of the bottlenecks are, and how to justify things like experimentation and that sort of thing. And there's a whole section in there. They have, like using activity streams and measurement on like lead time and activity time. There's all kinds of stuff in there that you can use to bring visibility to that. And there may be some tools out there that maybe help do that, for you. But the farthest I've gotten so far is to look at some of those things, and they do look really valuable. You can show that to an executive, and they'll get it. They'll understand. Whether they will, the big thing in the manufacturing stuff is that leadership, they had to do a lot of this stuff covertly, right? Because leadership was so entrenched in, this is how we've always done it. These are the measurements that we think are valuable. And what you're doing is counterintuitive, so we won't let you do it. So they had to do it and show results and then ask. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that. But I think that what the best thing would be to do is to measure and let the data speak, and then come back and try to, persuade and convince based on that.
So there is an evolution happening, revolution in project management, right? From waterfall model to an agile model. How do you do that in project management system? That's why you sell Jira Block Trello, right? Because Trello does more well, Jira does a lot of that. So I think that's where you're going to be able to capture that kind of information. Here's all the value streams that we've worked on. Here's our process flow, we're posting sequentially before, here it is today. And that's what we as an organization need to figure out. How can we bring that to our customers and say, look, let us try it on this one product.
Mhm.
Because this is all based around any product. And you say it's Iris, and you used to do it this way, they're doing it another way. And we brought all these DevOps concepts to Iris. And here's what we're successful at doing that today.
Yeah. So to kind of summarize that is that, try to, there are tools out there, like you mentioned, Trello is a great way to view boards and stuff to help bring visibility and try to, get buy-in to try something and see how it goes, right? Which is one of the big things they recommend is just, need a very successful offering for them in terms of revenue and that sort of thing. But the leadership was willing to say, let's try this. We know what we're doing now is painful with what we're doing, and we don't want to carry all that over, so let's just give them the freedom to do this. And it was very successful.
Yeah, I had one thought that went along with what Christy was asking about. I mean, because what you say is true. There's a lot of people looking for DevOps people,
Mhm.
right? And what I think, that's why I'm excited about this more learn and discuss component of this.
Mhm.
So I think this we can. There's a lot to learn, and if we spend some time learning it, I think we can turn around, pitch that to clients as where we're coming in as a software consultant, where we're improving their processes. I think it's really good value add for clients. It's an item. So I would love to see more follow-up here.
Yeah. Todd's comment was just love to see more follow-up with some of this stuff, and because there's opportunities for us to do consulting at this level with clients to help them, realize like what their bottlenecks are and help them understand kind of like the bigger picture related to this. And that, again, automation is great, and it might be a necessary component, but it's not the whole picture. Anybody else? Yeah.
My introduction to DevOps and listening to it, I hear a lot of overlap with like Scrum and Kanban.
Mhm.
So
prescribe one methodology over another, although Agile just fits in really well, and also like the Kanban board, Kanban approach, in that they enforce or they allow for small increments of development work to produce results, right? Like the idea even within Scrum is potentially shippable product at the end of a sprint, right? And it's actually it seems like it's very rare where we actually get there, right? Like at the end of a sprint, we can say, we could deploy this to production right now with full confidence, right? Usually we're like, okay, this kind of works, here's what this feature looks like. And if we were to say, okay, let's deploy it to production, people are like, oh no, we're not ready. So it definitely feeds into that. They don't, necessarily, they mention that there are companies that have more of a waterfall process that, they get a lot of the other aspects of this, and so they're successful in spite of not using, Agile or whatever. So there are a lot of factors to play, but having that in place, Agile in place gives you a better chance probably of realizing the benefits here. So, great question. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, and more to come.